Hi, I'm Dr. Alyssa Alcorn from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the Research and Impact Lead for the LEANS project. LEANS stands for Learning About Neurodiversity at School. We've presented at BERA before, so you might have heard of this project. This year, I'm talking about our LEANS Champions program. This was a pilot program to train neurodiversity educator experts who could help others use this program and generally get involved with teaching about neurodiversity within a school context. I'm representing a larger team of people today. First of all, our LEANS Community Impact Project team. We created this current course as part of ESRC impact funding with our charity partner, the Salveson Mind Room Center. But I'm also representing the people who helped create the original LEANS resource in the first place. Our research team made up of researchers and community members, as well as our educator participatory design team and all of the people who are supporting the project. So in this talk, I'll say a little bit about what the LEANS program is anyway, because the rest of it doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't know the program that we're talking about. Then I'll go on to talking about the Champions program. And this program kind of sits like an extra layer on top of LEANS and is about helping people access the classroom resource. I'll tell you a bit about our Champions pilot training program and what we think worked and worked less well about this program, as well as what Champions have actually been doing since becoming involved with LEANS. And then a few words to close about what might be next, building on this pilot training course. Everything I'm going to say today is really a short overview, but our website is the main hub for information about LEANS. So I'd encourage you to please visit our website for more information, as well as other talks, reporting, media, and FAQs. So a little bit of background that may not be news to many other researchers interested in inclusive education, which is that in the UK nations and the Republic of Ireland, most children who have neurodevelopmental differences, whether they're diagnosed or not, they're going to be in mainstream primary schools. And in those schools, teachers have an enormous amount that they need to do and they need to know as part of their careers. And that means that any time to talk about neurodevelopmental differences has usually been quite squeezed in their training. It means that in the classroom, they may not have a very strong understanding of these differences and how they can impact children's school experiences. And overall, that impact of limited understanding from teachers and peers can be quite negative. When we look at the official curricula in the UK nations and Ireland, neurodiversity is not on that curricula yet, and there's relatively few off-the-shelf resources for children in any age group or for teachers who want to talk about this topic in class. So the LEANS program has really been about trying to address neurodiversity knowledge gaps and attempt to shift people's attitudes and actions around neurodivergence. So the LEANS program that I've mentioned a few times, again, stands for Learning About Neurodiversity at School. And it tries to do pretty much what it says on the box here. It's a new and completely free package of resources that tries to help teachers introduce neurodiversity concepts to mainstream primary school classes in a way that's age appropriate, but also accessible and engaging and really focused in daily experiences. The target age group is the upper end of primary school, so we're looking at age 8 to 11 years. And really importantly, this is a curriculum that the whole class explores together. It's not a psychoeducation program only for children who have certain diagnoses, but something for everyone to do and reflect on together with their teacher, who is the person who's going to know that group of children best, and the person who will be there in the longer term to answer sensitive questions as they come up and help children integrate this learning into other things that they're doing at school. So key topics within LEANS include neurodiversity terminology, as you might expect, but also talking about communication and miscommunication, fairness and unfairness, friendships, and asking people to reflect on positive changes they might make. There's a mixture of formats within the resource, including hands-on activities to try out new ideas and see how they apply to you. A lot of discussion, usually mediated by the teacher, to help be connecting these activities back to the neurodiversity terms and growing body of knowledge around neurodiversity, but also fictional story content about a neurodiverse class that lets us really get inside the heads of fictional children to hear about the variety of experiences that they're having at school. And sometimes also for them to ask questions that children in a real classroom may feel they can't ask. There's also a small number of explainer videos that help introduce that new terminology in an age-appropriate way. Because this is going to be a new topic for a lot of teachers, LEANS is supported by an extensive teacher handbook that we sometimes call a training course in a book. It not only gives background about what neurodiversity is, but talks through a number of ethics and safety planning issues that school staff should consider, deciding whether LEANS is right for you and your class, as well as giving fairly detailed lesson planning information for all of the LEANS units. In 2021, we evaluated LEANS in schools, and based on the results of that evaluation, we concluded that it was an acceptable, feasible, and safe program that was also successfully teaching children new neurodiversity knowledge and shifting their attitudes. And a preprint paper with the full evaluation study results has just been released in September 2023. After some post-study revisions, we released LEANS to the public as a free download in June 2022. That set us up for the next round of questions, which was, what about the longer term? What will happen when the fuss of the releases died down, when the project funding eventually ends? And to help try to make LEANS impactful in the longer term, we secured some dedicated funding with our charity partner, the Salveson Mind Room Center. And a priority for that was to move expertise out of the research team into the community so that there would be multiple sources of community-based help and support that would be sustainable in the long term, even after the end of funded staff time. So that brings us up to the LEANS Champion Pilot Training Course and program as it's run so far from late in 2022 all the way through 2023. So the big idea of the Champions program is that of program ambassadors, which is certainly not a new idea, but has been quite an effective model in a lot of different places. This is about educators becoming local expert helpers, both for the LEANS program specifically and more generally being ambassadors for the concept of talking about neurodiversity and teaching neurodiversity in schools. So from the very beginning, we defined 4 possible roles for the LEANS champions. And the first one, probably the biggest one, is awareness. We don't want LEANS to just get dusty on a shelf when the funded project time ends, but for people to keep hearing about it and discovering it and choosing to use it over time. And that brings us to the second role, which is about adoption, to encourage people to consider adopting LEANS and also to make considered choices about whether it's going to be a practical and ethical choice for them. Then supporting people during LEANS delivery and helping model good practice around this topic. Finally, for people to help connect educators who are interested in this topic to one another to spread the support network further. So 4 champions roles. So those are the goals for the champions as a role. What about the training course as a training course? The first goal was to help really build people's confidence, because there are educators who've got good neurodiversity knowledge, but they may not necessarily have confidence in it or in having conversations with other educators about those issues. So to try to build that confidence and help people get the most of what they might already know. We explicitly talked a lot about talking. We wanted to help equip people to have conversations about neurodiversity issues and even be explicitly making a case for why this is a meaningful topic and why it can connect to things that are already on the curriculum or part of local priorities. And finally, we wanted to equip people with detailed behind the scenes knowledge of LEANS principles that would help them make decisions in new situations in a way that would be congruent with the values and the underlying logic of the original program. So the basic plan for the course is that we ran 4 online twilight sessions in November 2022. We had 2 cohorts of about 14 people each. And for planning purposes, we split the course into 2 parts. Part 1 really focused on the LEANS program and becoming a LEANS subject expert. This is the underlying reasoning and principles I just mentioned on the last slide. And then putting that in a slightly larger context of why teach about neurodiversity? What kind of different cases can we make for the value of that that might speak to different local priorities around the UK and Ireland? The second part of the course was really looking outward more towards those kind of awareness and support for adoption champions roles. This is about applying the LEANS knowledge and reasoning to do those things, and also give some people some specific tools around action planning and kind of community mapping to try to help them make the most productive decisions about what activities they might want to carry out in their particular area and whether they might want to work together to do that. So within the course, especially the LEANS expert half of the course, one of our main structures was using big why questions. And we've done many, many talks and dissemination activities about LEANS. We get some of the same questions again and again, and some of them sound like simple questions, but the answer to the question, the reasoning, actually says something very important about the whole approach we've taken to teaching about neurodiversity and the principles of the program as a whole. For example, the question of, well, why is LEANS for delivery to the whole class? Is a question that has both a simple answer, that it was designed that way, but also quite a profound answer in terms of making the argument that what everyone in the class knows and believes and chooses to do is important. All the people in the class make up the diversity of that group. Everyone is a part of this topic. And it's not necessarily helping neurodivergent pupils to only focus on them when there's this larger number of people in the class whose knowledge and decisions also matter. So there's multiple questions like that, and we use these big whys to make a structure for the course to get at some of these underlying principles and really explicate the reasoning that runs through the materials in the teacher handbook but may not be obvious. So in terms of who was part of the Champions course, we knew there was a lot we didn't know here and ultimately took a kind of try it and see approach in terms of who we recruited onto the course. Some of those known unknowns were what kind of professional roles would be the best fit for the Champions roles? Should we be looking for teachers, for educational psychologists, head teachers, a mix of lots of people in different roles? We really didn't know, so the overriding factor was who was interested and qualified. We also didn't know whether the course would be equally relevant to educators in different locations because we had people from across the UK nations and the Republic of Ireland all mixed up in the course together. We did have a basic set of requirements. The first one was that people were actively working in primary education now, whether that was in one school or in a service across many schools. Also that they'd had at least several years experience in primary education and were not fresh out of a teacher training program. And most importantly, that they had a positive and accepting attitude toward neurodiversity. So if you don't, there's really very little point in being involved with a program like this, where that is the big picture goal. So the participants that we recruited, we ran a short application process and ended up offering 28 places. And within that, we were quite strategic in terms of actively selecting people to try to have a mix of locations within the UK and Ireland, different professional roles and different specialist expertise. For example, some people identified themselves as having special knowledge of dyslexia or autism or certain types of settings. And across this group, we also have quite a good variety of lived experience. People who are themselves neurodivergent or parents of neurodivergent children, already engaged with advocacy, or maybe even all of those things. So of this group of people, we had 24 of them who completed the course, which we were very happy with. We thought that was quite a high number to continue through. This slide has just a couple of example questions that we used as part of our feedback, and I've pulled these out simply because the data is a little bit quicker to show than some of the others. I mentioned with the course goals that we wanted to try to improve people's knowledge or their confidence in their knowledge about the LEANS program and about neurodiversity, and also in having neurodiversity conversations with colleagues, and ask people to rate themselves between 0, which is no knowledge at all, up to 100 being expert knowledge. And we had quite a spread across the group. We don't have any statistical tests on these slides here. We're just looking at the change in the mean ratings, but we see that they've definitely gone up between the pre-course time point and following up with people several months after the end of the course. And I'm quite happy to see that at that follow-up point, we don't have anyone who rated themselves as having less than a moderate level of knowledge about all of these 3 things. So it seems like either people's knowledge has increased or their confidence in that knowledge increased, or both, which is an outcome we were really pleased to see. We have extensive qualitative course feedback, but I wanted to highlight 2 kind of flavors of course feedback. There were a number of people who shared that they thought the training had really impacted them. One person wrote, "The LEANS training boosted my confidence and motivation to raise neurodiversity across the school. Embedding the content within the school curriculum is a longer-term project." Another person was focused more on the Champions as a program and kind of the longer term feasibility. And we did get some very good and practical feedback with people kind of picking apart what we've done so far and trying to think about how we could really make this work as a program. For example, one educator highlighted, "My concern is that without funding, you're relying on the goodwill of very busy people to put the message across. I think charging for training would help keep the project afloat, fund trainers, and place value on the resources, as research shows people assume better quality when there's a price tag attached." And the important background to this feedback is that due to our grant funding to create the course, it was essentially funded up front, and there was no direct cost to the course participants to take part in the training. And what we were asking is for those who wished to promote LEANS afterwards, that was going to be a voluntary role. So we have had some concerns raised about that and are looking at that a bit more in terms of the longer term sustainability of this model. There may be some issues with it. So I wanted to say a bit about what happened after the training course, because the training course alone did not make people into LEANS champions. Following the training, people could opt in to that champion's role, which among other things means they're publicly listed on our website as being available to help people. So we created a champions agreement document that set out on each side, the project team side and the champion side, what we would expect from each other and how we would support and communicate with one another, being really clear about the expectations and what we could offer or not. An important point is that it is completely up to individual champions to decide what kind of activity they want to do around awareness or supporting adoption, answering questions. It's really up to them. There's no quota, there's no defined to-do list. We want people to fit activities as much as possible to the roles and networks that they already have, and people have been quite active and quite creative about doing that. So of the 24 people who completed the training, we had 18 opt in to become champions, which I was really, really happy about. We didn't know if that many people would sign up. One explicitly declined, one offered support but couldn't commit, and then 4 people did not answer. So we asked at the spring feedback point why people wanted to become champions, and got a number of comments that kind of clustered into 4 main ideas. The first one is that people spoke quite strongly about the perceived benefit for pupils and staff of teaching about neurodiversity in schools, and clearly saw the Champions program as being aligned, with that purpose and that goal. A number of people also mentioned a specific desire to promote LEANS, not just any neurodiversity teaching, but this program specifically. Also, a number of comments about perceived good fit between the types of champions roles, the awareness, adoption support, modeling good practice, and so on, and the existing professional roles people already had. We had a number of people who were in roles where they're already providing specialist advice to colleagues, particularly for people who might be working in a service where they're already moving across schools. And then generally, a number of people cited a desire to help or advise others. So a few words now about what our champions have been doing, the 18 people who opted in to become champions. What have they actually done as part of that role? So here's an example that was hot off the press when I originally presented at BERA in September. We have a LEANS champion, Susan White, who's an additional support for learning teacher in Dumfries and Galloway, so the very southern part of Scotland. And she led 3 LEANS information workshops at the Dumfries and Galloway Council Inclusive Education Learning Festival. And this is something that Susan organized and delivered completely independently. She didn't need any permission from the LEANS team or wasn't asking for help. This was her deciding on something that was going to be relevant and take advantage of a local opportunity here. And after the event, she shared it was well attended with lots of people saying they would go and look more at the resource and would like to carry it out in their school. So success all around, I think. Great example. So thank you again, Susan, for running those workshops. So again, at the spring feedback point in May 2023, we offered a very long list of possible activities that people might have done and asked them to tick off which ones they had tried, if any. And from that, the 5 most commonly reported champions activities were LEANS discussion, advice, or support within your same school or service, sharing the LEANS resources, information sheet, or website, contributing to classroom or school level discussion about adoption. And then this one surprised us a bit, creating newsletter articles, blog posts, or other content about LEANS. And then rounding out the top 5, presenting about LEANS to immediate colleagues. However, we had really fantastic variety across the list. The champions at the spring feedback point reported 19 different types of activity, from running workshops all the way up to speaking to government policymakers about neurodiversity. So that was really amazing. We hadn't expected there'd be so much variety. There was, however, something that we were expecting to see as a big champions activity that barely even made it onto the list. Through May 2023, champions received almost no help requests from the public, meaning people who were not immediate colleagues or in the same service. And this had been one of the big reasons to create the program in the first place, because we got quite a lot of questions coming in centrally to the LEANS team, and also heard direct requests from people, for example, in the Q&A portion of talks, asking about local help, saying, who can I ask, who can help me? People with very sort of school or location specific questions about using the program. So then in the training course, we spent a lot of time talking about how you might handle incoming public queries or what to do if you got too many and similar questions. But it seems that this is maybe just not a way that people want to use this support. We're really unclear at this point whether this is a lack of awareness that the support is available or just not the type of help that people most want, even if people appear to have asked for that. It's possible that our local help isn't local enough and that people want to go down the hall, not write an email to an educator who they don't know. So there are some things that are not captured by the numbers in terms of how many people opted in to be champions, changes in knowledge. We had a goal for a team of champions as ambassadors for LEANS, and we have an amazing team of champions. And in the middle was the training course, which kind of got this. And we really, diving into the feedback, we really had quite uneven value added by the training course to many of the participants. And that includes a number of the people who opted in to be champions. And there was definitely quite a bit of frustration for many participants at various points. And this was not a particularly peaceful course to run. And I'll say a little bit about what might have happened there. So in the group of people who participated in the course, it was quite clear that there was very mixed knowledge and expectations that came in, and that made a difference to the course delivery. There was a significant minority of people who seemed to expect the course to be really different than what we'd actually planned to deliver, or possibly even expected the LEANS program to be something different than it actually is. And this was a big surprise, seeing as people had to, fill out an application form to be considered for the course. There was also quite a wide range of course preparation and LEANS program knowledge. The most essential part of course preparation we asked people to do was reviewing the program materials so they'd be familiar with them at the start. And it's clear we had a mix from people who had only very briefly looked at them to people who were almost as expert as the research team. And that meant that some content was quite repetitive for the experts, and some of it was quite out of context for the people who had less familiarity. So this sort of mixture of expectation and preparedness then had a knock-on effect on the experience and the quality of the group discussion and the sort of structured problem solving and reflection activities, which is going to be a familiar experience for many people. So what happened here? What seems to have happened that we ended up with such a mix in the course? We have three possible hypotheses, but we don't know which of them might explain the most. The first one is that we made some incorrect assumptions in terms of our advertising or our recruitment. On paper, the applicants certainly were qualified. They had the type of experience that we asked for, absolutely. However, the thing that was often missing is people having knowledge of the LEANS program, when this is a training course that revolves very explicitly around this one particular program. It's possible that in trying to create an application form that was, light touch and wouldn't take too long, that we maybe went too far in that direction and should have probed people a little bit more about their interest. There's also high interest and unmet demand in general around teacher training for neurodiversity or about neurodivergence. In our session on the day at BERA, this was something that several different presentations touched on, is this level of unmet demand for training. And I wonder if some people might have seen that this training was available and free and said, great, I'll take that one, even though it wasn't general training about neurodiversity, but something more specific. It also is possible that, as one of our champions raised in her feedback, that maybe people were not taking us as seriously because the course was free at the point of offer. Maybe they didn't make such a careful decision because they didn't need to seek approval for funding, pay out of their pocket, anything like that. Based on the feedback and the correspondence we've had with the people who did opt in to become champions even after the course, I do have to wonder if some of them had already made up their mind to become champions, regardless of what happened during the training course itself. It's clear that a number of our champions have already been very, very active in their local context in terms of speaking up for neurodiversity and for inclusion issues more generally. And some of them seemed to see the LEANS program or the LEANS champions as a tool or a way to focus their activity and move forward these professional goals and values and priorities that they already had before we ever dreamed up the training course. So this obviously isn't very sustainable. We can't rely on pre-existing highly committed people forever. So thinking about the potential for champions training going forward, a big question is, well, given the mixed experience, given the mixed expectations, who should this be for and what should it be for? And presenting at BERA in September, I posed these two kind of options. Should it stay as a master class and a deep dive into LEANS? Should it move more towards being an introduction to the program or neurodiversity in general? And with further discussion, we are deciding to keep focusing on the first one because this is something that only the LEANS team can provide. There's others who can also potentially provide introductory content about neurodiversity. So we're going to focus on that primary goal, and that was the reason we created the program. Another big question is much more practical, saying whatever we decide to do, how can we really clearly communicate that to a potential audience and target our recruitment better than happened in the first round? There's not going to be one easy answer to that. Finally, there's the issue of funds. And we really have to think very carefully about whether offering free training and asking educators to volunteer is ultimately sustainable. This may be a place where a little bit of funding for a small number of people might go a very long way in the long term. And this is something that we're still thinking about now. I wanted to wrap up the talk today by saying a huge thank you to all of our LEANS champions who are listed here. And you can find out more about our champions and about the support they offer by visiting the project website, where we have a dedicated page about the program. So once again, the LEANS program that I've mentioned throughout is available now. It's free. We've had an amazing number of downloads from around the world, so I'd encourage you to have a look if you haven't seen it. Once again, for any further information about the project, I'd encourage you to visit our project webpage, where we have contact information, or my email appears at the bottom of the screen. Thank you very much for listening today.